It's fully threaded radio, Unthreaded.
Hi, everyone. Eric Dudas with you again. On this Unthreaded edition of the podcast, I speak with Atlas Distribution founder Scott Camp. Scott is a 23-year-plus veteran of Fastenal, an organization that needs no introduction in the fastener industry, of course. Founded in 1967 by an extremely driven man, widely admired, Mr. Bob Kierlin, who sadly passed away in February 2025, earlier this year. During this conversation, Scott discusses his experiences traveling with Bob Kierlin as they checked up on branches, and Scott gained an experience. Eventually, after leaving Fastenal, he founded Atlas Distribution with the idea of helping distributors to unlock the potential of their global supply chains. Lots of ideas and skills honed under the tutelage of Bob Kierlin. I'll get right into this conversation, and I'd like to thank the partners of Fully Threaded Radio who make it possible. The title sponsors, Brighton Best International, Global Fasteners, and Star Stainless. Fully Threaded Radio is also sponsored by Buckeye Fasteners, BTM Manufacturing, Eurolink Fastener Supply Service, Cressa, Andrews International, InSequel Software, Fastener Technology International, Jalen Franco, MW Components, Solution Industries, Volt Industrial Plastics, and Worth Industry USA. I want to thank Scott Camp for sitting down and having this conversation with me. I had to twist his arm just a little bit to do it. I know it's a deeply personal experience to share things like this. I think we hit just the right tone here, and I think a lot of people will find this conversation very valuable and inspirational. No question, Bob Kierlin was a rare and towering figure in the fastener industry. Thanks for listening, everyone. Here's this conversation with Scott Camp as he remembers Fastenal founder Bob Kierlin. Scott Camp, I'm so glad you're here. You're up there in Winona, Minnesota, aren't you?
Yes, sir, I am. Staring at the beautiful Mississippi River.
That's the home base to a lot of good things, including the Mississippi and Atlas Distribution and a little fastener company known as Fastenal. You know a little bit about that, don't you?
Yes, sir, I sure do.
Well, we're here to talk about Bob Kierlin. I'm so glad that you agreed to do this with me. It's been on my mind for a while. I know there's a lot of people who know the name. They don't know a lot about him. And you certainly have your own perspectives on that. Let me ask you, how long had you been at Fastenal when you first met Bob Kierlin?
So I started in June of 91, right out of university in North Carolina. I went to Elon University. Then it was Elon College. But I started June 12th of 91 as my first job out of school. And I had been up to Winona for training not too long after I started. So if I started in June of 91, it was sometime later that year that I came to Winona and had the privilege to meet Bob and many others.
So you were a young guy at that point. How old were you?
Yeah, I would have been 23, about to be 23. Young guy, a long time ago.
A lot of foundational experiences. So how did it happen that he asked you to accompany him on a road trip? Because you have a lot of experiences that stem out of these road trips. There were more than one. How did the first one happen?
Well, a lot of your listeners, I'm sure, know the movie Tommy Boy. It's one of the best sales road trip movies out there, but it was nothing like that. But before we get into the road trip, there's a lot of other, I guess, a couple other things I wanted to point out. So I started in 1991, like I said, out of college, went to Winona not too long after that for training. And back then, I think Winona was about 63 million in revenue. And I was working for the second branch in the Southeast, was in Burlington. The first branch was Rocky Mount, North Carolina. So Fastenal was really a Midwestern distributor of fasteners, and they had spread down into Texas, I think, in the late 80s or maybe 1990 into Texas, but no presence in the Southeast. So here's this young kid out of college, knew a little bit about fasteners from working construction in high school, but had the chance to go up to Winona, Minnesota. And there, you have to remember, this is before like the internet. This was before being able to Google things and look up things. And but when I went up, Jeff Stengel was in charge of training at the time, and they put me at this little Sterling motel in Winona. Kind of flew in and they dropped me off and had the weekend, had no car, no transportation, very frugal, very conservative, cost conscious company. And so kind of bummed around for a day, Sunday, and then we had training on Monday. But Bob came in like he would always do, in a very humble, yet direct way and kind of set the tone for the training. But I remember I met him in person in Winona, but it wasn't until our store was up and running and we had some pretty good sales going that Bob used to call every branch every day that had met or achieved more than 5,000 in revenue per day. And so I remember we had a big job for a wastewater treatment facility in North Carolina, and we had like daily releases. It was a lot of cadmium plated A307 grade B heavy hex. And then we were just releasing it every day. So he was calling like every day for like 5 or 6 days straight. And so I got to know him a little bit from talking to him every day on the phone, because he would call probably 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning, and we'd all be standing around the phone waiting for Bob to call because we knew we were going to get the phone call. And he did that for many, many years. He would call every branch every day that achieved a certain sales number. I think it was 5,000 per day.
Wow.
Made us feel special. You know, the founder of the company would call and recognize our hard work, you know, thank us for our hard work, and certainly recognize the sales and the profit. And he knew all the numbers. He got his Bible every morning, got his report every morning, and he started making calls. I remember he did that for many, many years.
So he was a very methodical person that way from the beginning. Now, this is, again, early 90s. People take it for granted. It's such a giant company these days, but really it grew fast, didn't it?
Yeah, it was kind of the basic model back then was 30% everything, 30% more stores, 30% growth, 30% in profit and earnings. It was just 30%, 30 to 40%. And I just remember not having worked anywhere else. I feel fortunate and blessed that I went into an organization that was making the turn, investing. They had obviously gone public in 1987, so this was only 4 years or so after they went public. But I remember calling up my father like the first or second day on the job, and I'm like, you will not believe what they're letting me do. I mean, here's this young man out of college, really 2 people in the branch at the time. Later, as you grow, you could hire resources, typically a part-timer, and you kind of grow step by step because the company was so cost conscious, so frugal. I think that's how he got the title, the cheapest CEO. He didn't pay himself much, but everything was used furniture, used desks, used equipment. We leased all of our branches at the time. We owned our pickups and the inventory and the fleet. But it was just, I got to do everything. I got to make sales calls. I got to price product, what to sell the B7 threaded rod for, and make deliveries and call on contractors and stock bins and purchase product, source product. It was like running your own business, and the decentralized decision making that a lot of companies talked about, decentralizing, empowering folks. That was in practice day one when I joined the company. And that's why I stayed for over 23 years and why I think a lot of people stay a long time. It's a wonderful culture and a great place to work.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's turn back to these road trip experiences that you had. How did you get selected? The head count there must have been a lot smaller. You're a young guy, but still, how did it happen?
Yeah, so I had moved to Minnesota in the fall of 95. So I was working in the stores for a couple of years, and I jumped over into distribution, got into purchasing, living in Atlanta, working in the regional distribution center there. And then I had the opportunity to move to Winona in November of 95. So I was already living in the area, a small, relatively, not a small company at that size, but still a small, very intimate, office environment. And I think I got tapped. I don't know. I don't remember us drawing straws. I don't suggest I drew the short straw, but I was excited and nervous. Imagine, a 26, 27-year-old, whatever I was at the time, having an opportunity to drive. Bob did not like to fly. So when Bob would go visit stores, he would drive, and some of us would get tapped to do it. And I got the privilege twice to accompany Bob from Minnesota to Florida and back. And these were road trips when he did a lot of driving. We kind of shared the responsibility. It's not like he sat in the back and I chauffeured him. He put in the work. He had very specific rules of when to get gas, when to stop, when to eat. But he was always so generous. So I don't remember exactly how it came up, but he had a trip planned, and there was a few of us in the room. And I don't know if I was nominated or I volunteered, but it was a great opportunity to spend time with Bob.
So I wanted to ask you about that flying versus driving idea. He didn't have Joe Madden complex, did he? Or did he do it out of frugality or fear or just preference? What was that about?
You know, I knew that when he was in the Peace Corps and other I guess phases in his life that he flew, but I know he didn't really care to fly too much. So it was just kind of a known thing that Bob preferred not to fly, and he drove, and all of us kind of shared the responsibility or carried the burden, so to speak, to make sure he got safely from A to B. But yeah, he just didn't like to fly.
Okay. Well, really, I can't blame him. I wish I was in that position where I could have somebody go along with me whenever I needed it to. So then
and Bob wasn't the kind of guy that no matter how wealthy he became, wasn't going to spend the money to buy a plane or anything like that. That was never his style, right? It's just there's a lot of things he could have done to make that easier, but he just liked hit the open road, and as long as there was an A&W on the way, and we'd stop and get a root beer float. He loved his ice cream and his root beer, but that was usually on the way back when we got into Wisconsin. There's a couple A&Ws there off the highway because it had to be efficient. You had to be able to pull over, get gas, get something to eat, and get back on the road. It was all about efficiency with Bob.
Did he have the reputation as being a super frugal guy even at the time, or did that sort of emerge? I mean, was that widely known?
Yeah, I ever since I came around in the early 90s, it was just known that he was very practical, very conservative, didn't believe in any kind of waste. He was super efficient and very frugal. He drove, I remember several cars over the years, but I think the first time it was like a Chrysler Sebring or something convertible. That was about the nicest car. I think otherwise it was a lot of minivans, Chrysler Town and Countries. But yeah, I drove a lot of very practical cars and minivans, very unassuming. Would park, he would get there early, so he always had a good parking spot. There's no reserved parking for the owners, the executives, the leadership team. You want to have a good parking space, you get to work early. So Bob is always parked up front, not because of his title, but because he came in earlier than most people.
How cool.
Yep.
Okay, so you're out on the road heading down to Florida. Was the point of the trip to sort of randomly drop in on branches and check up on them and so forth? I mean, how did that go?
Yeah, he just wanted to get out and see stores. I mean, he wasn't too interested in seeing suppliers along those specific trips. Bob was more focused on the employees, being visible as much as possible, stopping in, seeing the stores, checking out the branch operations, thanking the team for their service, and always sharing some words of wisdom. But he had very high standards, and that's the one thing when I think about Bob is how much he believed in the potential of people, and that most of us are not anywhere in the realm of maximizing our potential. He felt that way about individuals, about family, about government, that a lot of opportunity and room for improvement. But Bob had very high standards. He expected you to perform at a very high level. And again, back then, there wasn't Google Maps. All of the maps for the Fastenal stores were hand-drawn by the managers and submitted to Winona, and they kept them in a 3-ring binder, I think. And so when you were going out to visit stores, you'd go and you'd make photocopies from the binder of all the different branches. And I remember some of the maps were horrible. And he would spend maybe 10 to 15 minutes trying to find the store. If the map was wrong, then he'd just eventually on to the next store. And he wouldn't waste a lot of time trying to figure it out. And I think his belief was if the manager of the store cannot draw a map coming in from the different directions into the store, if he couldn't do that, it's probably not a store worth visiting. Because if the map is wrong, there's probably a whole lot of other things that are wrong. I just remembered he had patience up to a point. And when he got to that point, it was time to move on to the next thing. He didn't give you too many chances, but I just remember that. On to the next. And fortunately, most of the maps were really, really good. And we only had a few stores we had to skip.
I guess I can understand that. So did you ever inadvertently, especially in the early times of traveling with him, kind of get under his skin? Did you ever sort of realize, I think I pissed him off?
One time, there was one time that I think I pushed the envelope a little bit. I was driving. And it was my turn to drive, and we would drive all night. We'd drive through the night. Usually, sometimes we would stop. But I remember he was very particular about, at half a tank, you start really looking at the gas gauge, and you don't let it get down to a quarter of a tank. And you certainly don't get it down to where the the light comes on and your distance to empty is, in the short term. He liked to make sure we didn't get into the safety stock, if you will, of the fuel. But I remember one time, I think I pushed the envelope. It's like, Bob, we can go there's another hour, and then we can, he just looked at me, and I took the next exit and we got fuel.
One look was all it took. Yeah. Not a redliner.
No.
I don't know if I would have made it, Scott.
I was, again, young. I wasn't married at that point. I was in a relationship. My wife was receptionist at her beginning of her career at Fastenal. She was a receptionist, and she moved into purchasing and did other things. But she would screen Bob's calls because, of course, everybody wanted to talk to Bob. And he had a list of certain people that could go right through to him. Otherwise, the receptionist had to screen a lot of his calls. But that's kind of a whole nother thing there. But yeah, I was single, obviously drinking the blue Kool-Aid. I was all in, and I was up until I left to start Atlas. But I just remember feeling so honored and special to have that opportunity to spend, 5 days with a guy on the road and just pick his brain and talk. And he was very open to questions and shared a lot of his growing up, a lot of his experiences in the Peace Corps, and just his perspective on life. And again, the family side of it, business, government. Later, he ended up serving in the state Senate. But just a very, very special person that I learned a lot from early in my career.
So did you guys talk politics a lot while you were driving along? Did you ever get the inkling that he might eventually get into it?
No. And I at that point, I didn't kind of understand the writing on the wall and how he wanted to serve. I knew that he was big on there was a concept that he had that he talked about, which he eventually, he wrote about it in his first book, Unified Theory of Life. It's one of his, I think he published it in 1993, but he talked about the concept that there's 4 forces that account for the development of societies in the modern world: the family, education, business, and government. And so he would not talk political. He was always very straight-laced, did a really good job not sharing too much of his views in one particular. You never really knew. You knew where he stood, but it wasn't about identifying with this party or that party or whatever. It was just real down-to-earth, common sense, grounded principles that, unfortunately, we've continued to stray from, I think, as a society. But education was always something he talked a lot about, and the importance of education, the importance of family, and how to mix those core values together, and the responsibilities that business has to support the family. And work-life balance and all that was really important, and it wasn't really a thing at the time, but Bob always believed in balance and putting family and education ahead of other things. And to the extent businesses can be good stewards of that, and then government, he was extremely, I remember, again, at that age, I wasn't thinking politically. I wasn't thinking the way I do now at 56, almost 57 years old. But I remember how he was frustrated with the inefficiency of government. And this goes back 30 some years ago, right? But no, I didn't really see the writing on the wall of him actually serving in the state Senate until kind of it happened, which I thought was really neat. I think he did it as long as he could until I think he got fed up with Jesse the Body Ventura. I think that was like the final straw. He couldn't handle it anymore.
Yeah, it made a lot of people rethink things. That's for sure. I remember that. Well, I know it's not probably a very fair question. I'll ask you anyway. What do you think he would think of the tariffs?
Bob was always a free markets guy. I think he would see, and again, I'm just trying to frame it in a way that doesn't have any of my beliefs or thoughts in it, but I think he would look at it as a tax on consumers, which it is, and that should require congressional oversight, right? And should not be able to be implemented unilaterally by the commander in chief. I think he agreed or understood the structure of government and that the checks and balances that were put in, and I think he would see it as probably an unlawful thing. But I don't know. That's just my opinion.
No, I see what you're saying. Just knowing what little I do, I have to say that I'm not surprised by the way you answered that. All right. So what do you think that, again, trying to channel him, what do you think he would think of the current AI world? And I mean, he wasn't a Luddite by any stretch of the imagination. His first concept for Fastenal, mythologically, you can correct me, but it was the vending machine idea, which was really kind of a tech approach to fasteners. What would he thought of, or what did he think of AI?
Oh, goodness. He would probably see it as a tool to help people reach their potential. Again, the backdrop of this is that Bob felt that probably we as individuals were only achieving 40% of our capacity or our potential. He believed, I know that as you go through government, so if we as individuals are maybe achieving 40% of our potential, local government about the same, state government probably 30%, and the federal government even less. He believed further, like all these concentric circles, and the further away you get, the less efficient that it is. I would imagine he would look at the technology and the opportunity that represents for people and businesses really to achieve maximum potential, or at least much more than the 40% that he believed we achieved as humans. But I don't know. I can't go any deeper on that subject.
Well, no, again, I'm asking you to channel him, and I think it gives you an opportunity to really expand on what you took away from your time with him, and it's really a hat tip to the man. So let me ask you this then. Can you identify what you really took away from all of this experience and all this exposure to Bob Kierlin as you built Atlas Distribution? Is there something that stands out in your mind? You say, geez, I'm doing just what Bob would have told me to do.
Well, I think first and foremost, I know Bob believed that, organizations succeed to the extent that they utilize all of the resources, that all of the members on the team pursue a common goal, number one. That was most important. So I think a small team or a large team, you've got people in the boat and they've all got to be rowing together in synchronicity. So everybody has to pursue a common goal. That's whether that's our business in Taiwan or China or here in the U.S., everybody's on the same team and they're all kind of rowing in synchronicity. People and culture are it. I mean, if you don't get the, kind of the top 10 rules of leadership, and Bob's published them and they're all over YouTube. And I would encourage folks, if you want to learn more about the man, look at some of the YouTube documentaries that are out there from the different founders, and you get a sense for the people and the value system that Bob is a product of. But really the belief in people and the power of culture, and really the importance of setting very high goals. I think sometimes the goal setting is too much of a calculated process and not so much the power of belief. And one of the reasons I think the company was so successful was the power of belief. They really had a strong belief in people and set very, very high goals, and they believed in the power of people. And he actually published a book, The Power of Fastenal People, which there are probably some copies still circulating out there. But I think the one thing that always really stuck with me, Eric, was, hire great people, give them the tools and the resources to be successful, and get the heck out of their way. Like, let them get on with it. And the micromanaging and too many layers of management, and just the whole concept of leadership versus management. I think Bob told me this first, and probably one of the trips, the difference between leaders and managers. And really, when I distill it down, I think about, if you find yourself having to manage people, you've got the wrong people, or you have the wrong leader, because you don't manage people. You manage resources, you manage things, you lead people, you inspire people, you develop them, you train them, and you promote them, and you get out of the way. So there's a lot of concepts around leadership that I think everybody in the organization lives by, and I certainly carried with them. So hire great people, give them the tools, get out of their way, empower them, allow them to make decisions, hold them accountable when they do, and get up and keep moving forward. So the empowerment of employee is a lot of companies say they're decentralized. A lot of companies say that they aspire to be a bottom-up organization, and really they're not. Those are the things that I grew up young in my career, witnessing Bob and the other leaders of the company practicing what they preached. And I carry a lot of that with me today.
All right, let's get back on the road with Bob Kierlin again. Scott, give us one story that you've been thinking about that you haven't shared in a while. You told me a bunch of them when we were talking about this at the MWFA a couple of weeks back.
Well, I don't know if it was funny or tragic, but I remember one of the trips, we had left Winona, and Bob drove the first 4 hours. And I drove the last 4 or so hours down to Indianapolis, which I think was like an 8-hour or eight and a half hour drive. So we'd come in to pick up a new regional manager, was the title at the time, for the Southeast region. And I won't name any names. Let's just say we'll call him Mike, just as an example. So We left Winona, drove down to Indy, went to the airport. Of course, his plane was delayed. And so Bob and I are sitting there kind of at the airport waiting for him to come out. And he finally came out. We get loaded up in the rental car. He's excited, the new regional manager with Bob and Scott. And we're going to drive down to North Carolina because we're going down to attend his regional picnic. So he's not behind the wheel, maybe 10 minutes, and he's nodding off. And so Bob's in the passenger seat. We're in like one of these minivans. I'm in the back seat, like right behind the driver. And I'm watching him and he's nodding off. So I'm looking at Bob. Bob's sleeping. It's probably midnight at this point, and we were going to drive down to, I think we were going to Winston-Salem. He's nodding off. And I'm tapping him on the shoulder. I'm like, dude, pull over. So we just drove 8.5 hours to pick this guy up at the airport, waited around for an hour or so for him to finally arrive. And he gets behind the wheel and he's falling asleep after 10 minutes. So he pulls over. I get in the driver's seat. He's in the back. Bob is sleeping. Mike is sleeping in the back. And I don't know how far I drove.
And you're going to his regional picnic.
We're going to hit, yeah. So I'm chauffeuring him to his own regional picnic. We got Bob safely to Indy, and now we're trying to get down to North Carolina. I remember Bob wakes up and he looks in the back. He sees Mike sleeping. He looks over at me, and I'm, white knuckled, driving, trying to stay awake. And he's like, "What happened?" I'm like, "It's a long story, but Bob made me pull over, and he took the wheel, and we finished up the rest of the journey. We made it safely." And I don't think Mike was regional manager that long, to be honest. Not having anything to do with this trip, of course, but it's funny how things work out.
Yep, it's a winding road.
There weren't, with Bob, he was such a low-key, humble individual. It wasn't about the spotlight. There was nothing animated about him. It was all very scheduled, very predicted, very much kind of just he executed the plan. Probably the most enjoyable time was sitting with him at an Outback. I think it was the first time I'd ever been to an Outback steakhouse. We had been on the road for, I don't know, we're making our way back probably 4 days. And we had dinner one night. We actually stopped for a sit-down dinner, and Bob bought dinner, of course. And I remember sitting across from him in the Outback. And I think I had the Victoria's filet, which was probably the best steak I'd had at the time. But just sitting with him in an Outback, I think he had a glass of wine. I think I had a Foster's beer, and just having that time together, just sitting at the booth by the bar at the Outback. They're all the same. They all look the same. But yeah, just sitting with him and having a nice meal and talking about family. And I was, I think I was engaged at that point. I wasn't yet married, but he knew my wife because my wife, like I had said, was receptionist. And so I think we talked about Shiloh. We talked about my wife, talked about the goals that I had for my career and what I wanted to do. And if he got on a topic that was near and dear to him, he would just go on and on. Otherwise, he was a great conversationalist as long as the topic was stimulating. So I was always thinking, what can I talk about that he'd be interested in? So I ended up asking him a lot about different things: Peace Corps, his time at IBM, why he left IBM. And that always led back to culture and what he wanted to build, the type of company he wanted to build, and the type of culture that he wanted. But some of the best conversations had to do around cost estimations. Bob was very, very good at picking up the knife or the fork and saying, "Okay, Scott, what should this cost?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And so I'm looking at it. Okay, is it stainless steel? Is it, what's it made out of? And what's the manufacturing process to make it? Is it a stamping? What is the manufacturing process, and how much should it cost? And he was like the first person that ever challenged me to think about how something was made and what are all the cost drivers, like the raw material, the labor, transportation, distribution. What does it cost to receive it and store it and to finance the inventory? And he was very, very good at that. And he just had a drive to understand and drive out waste. I think other than people not reaching their full potential, what frustrated Bob more than anything was waste. If there was inefficiency, if there was unnecessary cost. And I think early on in the company, one of the reasons they were so incredibly profitable was they knew how to manage their costs. The cost of transportation, the cost of manufacturing, the cost of sourcing and procurement, and the human capital side of that as well. And I remember just always being challenged by him. And I got to the point, it took me a while, I got to the point where I would see him in the office and I would ask him, "Okay, Bob, what do you think this costs? And I would hand them a part. It might be a CNC machined part. It might be a PPAP level 3, a special part for an automotive application. I would give him all the information and I'd just give it to him. And I'd see him later that day, and he'd come and he'd either handwrite his answer on a Post-it note and give it to me, or he'd just tell me in the hallway, that's $1.28 a pound. And damn if he wasn't within 5%, plus or minus 5%, like all day long. But,
That's great.
yeah, he was one of the first to kind of get me thinking about, and that's probably why I fell in love with Asian manufacturing and just high volume cold forged manufacturing, is because I really had an appreciation for what should be the cost to produce that widget. And so Bob instilled that in me, and others after Bob, direct reports, people that I worked with, were really challenging me on that. And not just fasteners, but injection molded parts and, polypropylene or high density polyethylene, what should this thing cost? But Bob was big on the tool repair, bringing that into the industrial services, and even starting Fast Tool. I think it was in Mason City or Waterloo, Iowa. We started the Fast Tool division back, I think, in 1993, if I'm not mistaken. And, the idea of selling power tools and then also having the service centers be able to repair and fix the tools was kind of a neat concept. But I remember at one time it was, okay, how much did this DeWalt power tool cost? Because if I look at your discounts from DeWalt on all the replacement parts and all the components, this drill would cost about $5,000 to make. Clearly, they're producing it at scale for far less than that. And so that kind of gave me the motivation to go back and renegotiate discounts with DeWalt on the repair parts, because they were overcharging us for the repair parts. But it didn't matter what it was. If it was a nut or a bolt or a power tool, what should it cost? How do you drive out cost? And a lot of it was acquisition costs, distribution costs, and how do you bring that product to market? He was always thinking bigger picture and inspiring others to think about the details as well.
You pulled a lot out of that. When was the last time you saw him?
I saw Bob. It was downtown Winona, one of the restaurants here. He and Mary were there, and I was in with my wife and my daughter, and just said a brief hello to him. And it wasn't too long after that he had passed, and I went to the wake and the funeral. Saw a lot of people obviously in town. Huge turnout, as you can imagine, in support for a great man. But it was it really happened quick. Really happened suddenly, and it was quite a shock to not only the organization but the Winona community and as a whole. Everyone suffered a big loss that day and continue to grapple with him being having passed.
Of course, Winona is a Fastenal town. So the last time you talked to him in depth, did he give you any kind of an idea, thumbs up, thumbs down, like attaboy or anything like that?
Yeah, we used to go to the Signatures restaurant in Winona out at the Bridges Golf Course. Bob, he and Mary would dine there many, many times a night. And so if I was in town, if I had a supplier in from Asia, or I was with my family or others, he would always stop over and say hi. And he always encouraged me. He was always rooting for me. At least I had that feeling. He would, when I resigned and I left the company to start my business in Taiwan, the first company, he was, he thanked me for my service. Thank you for your 23 and a half years. And you're going to do great. And just, work hard, work smart, believe in people, and carry forward what you've learned. And every time I saw him, which was many, many times over the last, 8 or 9 years after I had left, he was always coming up. How's Atlas? He even stopped in the office. We have an office right downtown Winona. He was in the building doing something, I think maybe an accountant in the building. He was stopping in, but he had stopped in and said hello to the team. And I think I was in Taiwan. I missed him. But yeah, he was always there encouraging us to do well and just do good by the industry and do good for our little Atlas company.
And so you are, and what a great testimonial to a great man. That's what the real true heroes do, is they encourage those around them. And I tell you, I saw you and your team recently here in the semi-rural Northeast Ohio area. We had an opportunity to break a little bread, and you're there with your young team. And I had to think quietly to myself that there you are passing some of the things you learned down to a younger generation, and they're go-getter guys. And I know you're doing really well, and you picked up a lot from Bob Kierlin. I thank you so much, Scott Camp, for sharing some of your remembrances with us today.
My pleasure. A great man, and he's taught, I don't know, it's probably hundreds of thousands of people that have ever worked for the company and had some impact, Bob personally, directly or indirectly. And he just had such a profound impact on the organization, the community, and just the industry as a whole. And, Bob, I've always wished there was more recognition, but Bob always believed in staying out of the spotlight. He always believed in letting the team celebrate the other individuals and the team overall. But it's probably the most influential person of our industry, certainly within the fastener industry, who did not get the recognition that he would deserve by our standards, but he would have it no other way because of his humility and wanting to stay out of the spotlight.
Well, Scott Camp, you're doing what you can to pass that along. I know that with Atlas Distribution and your crew. Sure do thank you for sharing your remembrances of Bob Kierlin with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Fully Threaded Radio is a production of Fasteners Clearinghouse.